Matt mentioned the video technology meetup groups that run worldwide. I'm actually one of the organisers of Sydney Video Technology, and I've been running that in conjunction with Jeremy Brown since 2016. I also work in video delivery at Optus Sport, which is a major Australian sports streaming platform. We've got the exclusive rights to the Premier League, La Liga. I spoke last year at Demuxed about our journey towards kind of simplifying our overall streaming stack and moving more to the HLS CMAF space. And since then, in the last few months, I've had the absolute privilege of working on the FIFA Women's World Cup 2023, which was a home event for us. Another small fun fact, I actually submitted this talk before that event, and I kind of had an idea that it might be big, but I actually had no idea really what was about to unfold. So I'm going to start with kind of a brief history of women's football. I know we call it the world game, however, I am a Brit at heart, and the British like to think we own the sport, so I know we call it soccer here, I'm going with football. So let's rewind back. So as far as 1917, during the First World War, a female group called the Dick Kerr Ladies were formed by a group of women that were covering jobs in the factories in northern England, whilst the men had been conscripted to fight on the front lines. Now, this was one of the most successful women's football teams in history. They beat pretty much every team they came up against, including the British men's team regularly. They went and played in France, and they had some huge success in the US as well. Now, come the end of the war and into 1921, there was some murmurings about this women's team. I mean, who on earth were they? Who did they think they were? And on the 5th of December 1921, the FA imposed a ban on women's football, stating that the game of football is quite unsuitable for females and should not be encouraged. That ban lasted 50 years. 9 years later, in 1930, the first FIFA Men's World Cup took place, but it wasn't for another 60 years in 1991 that the first FIFA Women's World Cup happened. Now, there had been some other Women's World Cups in the meantime, formed from like grassroots movements, but FIFA didn't officially recognise the Women's World Cup until 1991. It only took 8 years for a Women's World Cup to be heralded as the Milestone Women's World Cup. That one was held in the US and was selling out NFL stadiums, was so popular. Moving on to 2015, the Women's World Cup final, also in the US, broke the record as the most watched soccer game in American history. And then in 2019, Optus Sport, where I work, secured the rights for the Barclays Women's Super League, which was the first broadcaster in the APAC region that actively went after some streaming rights for women's football. And then in 2023, the recent World Cup, as I mentioned, became the largest live streaming event that Australia has ever seen, and in fact, the most watched live sports event that the country has had since Cathy Freeman in the Sydney 2020 Olympics. Also a woman, by the way. So despite women's sports' ability to deliver these really strong attendance and TV ratings, women's sports is just not matched in terms of mainstream media coverage, kind of outside of these live events. So this is some data from Deloitte that was put together in 2021, and I pulled out some high-level numbers from this article that are kind of interesting. First one here is 41%. Now that is how much less coverage there was for women's tennis Grand Slam events than the men's across more than 80 countries. Number 7. Now that was a number that was shown as a large overlay on the screen in Japan as the Japan women went on to win the 2011 Women's World Cup. It was acting as a reminder to viewers of how many days they had left until digital cutover. 86,614 is the number of people that were in attendance at the Women's 2020 World Cup final in Melbourne in March 2020, just before COVID lockdowns. But this match was televised on a secondary channel to avoid clashing with a news bulletin, and hardly anybody watched. So what role has streaming played? I mean, according to the LA Times, streaming video platforms have the potential to level the playing field for the coverage of women's sports, which have long been given scant attention from major media outlets. And kind of in lieu of traditional support from traditional broadcast media, women's sports have kind of had to turn to online platforms to raise awareness of their sport and to sort of generate a fan base. Angel City, the LA team founded by Natalie Portman, is a fantastic example of this. They do all sorts online, from streaming matches right through to running auctions or running sort of polls and surveys to get their fan base to decide what colour their kit should be. Now, I've already mentioned the success of the Australian team, the Matildas, as they call them, during the Women's World Cup, but this graph also shows it beautifully. This is a graph from Sydney Water that shows how the population held on during the semi-final match against England and saved their toilet breaks till like half-time and the end of the match. Now, this isn't actually a new way to represent the popularity of a major sports match. This New York City Water did the same thing in 2018 with the men's Super Bowl. But the Super Bowl is a men's sport that's effectively had a lifetime of mainstream media coverage compared to women's soccer and women's soccer or football in a country, Australia, that has historically declared that it is not a football country. So we're good, right? We're done. But actually, it's still a bit chicken and egg now. I don't want to go down the minefield of prize money and those political areas, but fundamentally, the funding of women's sports is still not there in the same way. It's claimed that advertising against women's sports is a bit trickier for brands and advertisers, largely because there's an expectation that the fan base requires like a level of authenticity from the brand that kind of makes the campaigns a little harder. But those stats that I presented earlier from 2021 are still fairly true today. The coverage from the mainstream media just isn't there outside of the major tournaments that only come around once every 4 years. And should we also talk about scale? Now, operationally, from a streaming platform perspective, we have great ability to scale wide. We can surface multiple live events at the same time. Sure, operationally, it's tricky when you've got lots of stuff going on at once on a single platform, but that's really what we're built for. There isn't the space on traditional TV with channel restrictions and fixed delivery that we have to show lots of things at once. But at the same time, for us, scaling high is actually a lot harder. TV can attract like hundreds of millions of audience against certain things. And I've seen numbers from esports and particularly some of the stuff that Riot Games do, where they can boast hundreds of millions of viewers worldwide, but they split their load across multiple platforms and ecosystems. And we often talk about cricket in India, but at what bit rate? How do we achieve that same broadcast quality or better for these major streaming events? So am I saying we're nothing without television? Not really, but if we look at the numbers that these major events have achieved, kind of proportionate to the population in these countries, they're massive, and we still only got about 10 to 20% of those viewers are coming in online. But I think these are really good problems to have, and I can't end this on a negative. There's lots to think about and lots of really exciting places for our industry to go, and Demuxed is the perfect forum to really be thinking about that as we go through this two-day event. We hear lots reported in the media about consolidation, but what if we think about collaboration? What other opportunities can streaming present for other underrepresented sports and other underrepresented content in general? I mean, maybe I am too much of an optimist, but I actually am really excited about all the ways our industry has to grow and evolve over the years to come. So, thank you.